All right. Hello. Can you hear me? Cool. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session, How to Secure Your Salesforce Communities. Before we begin, let's see who we are. So by the show of hands, can you show us who are the developers in the audience? All right. Who are admins? Pretty good. And who are related to community in the roles of admins or moderators? Or pretty good. So almost 30%. And is there any other role in the audience who want to shout out their role? All right. So with that, this is the introduction for us. I am Swapnil, and I am a senior product security engineer on the product security team here at Salesforce. And one of the focus areas for me is to do the security reviews and security assessments of the features that are released in our product named Community Cloud. And with me, we have Kevin today.
Yeah, so I'm Kevin Secreton. I'm an engineer for Salesforce. Over the last few years, I've been working in the communities on the Lightning Community Builder and its backend services, and recently integrating with security directly.
Cool. Before we start, we need to show you the forward-looking statement. What is basically saying is some of the features that we are going to discuss today may come in the future releases of the product. So if you're going to make any investment decisions today, then make those based on what the features are available today in the product. So the goal of today's session is to educate community admins, moderators, developers, and pretty much anybody who is associated with the community ecosystem about the security controls and configurations that are built into this product. And as you can see in the agenda, we are going to touch 6 different topics today. There's a lot of content, so we need to maintain a pace. So if there are any questions, please save them towards the last part of the session, where you can ask questions on this microphone, which is right in the middle of the room. And we are going to show you the agenda slide before each topic so that we would know exactly where are we in this presentation. All right, the first part is a brief introduction to Salesforce communities. Kevin, do you want to introduce us?
Yeah, so it seems like everyone here is pretty familiar with communities, but just a reminder, they're Salesforce's way to let you create your own digital experiences, and whether they're for your own employees in your org or a public community or your customers, whatever. Out of the box, we have Lightning community templates for your particular business niche. There's also many other templates built by our partners on the App Exchange. And of course, you can build your own. And with the Lightning Community Builder, you can customize it without code, but we also expose code hooks so you can make your own custom Lightning components. There are, of course, Visualforce communities as well, though for the context of this discussion, Lightning communities is our focus, so there is much overlap between the security aspects of them. So now let's get started with security.
All right, so the first topic that we are going to see is how you can expose the the internal objects of your org through a community in a secure manner. So as you can see on the left here, your Salesforce org will have different objects like accounts, contacts, and cases. And one of the use cases of the community is to expose these objects in a secure manner. For example, whatever the Salesforce org objects are, only internal users have access to those objects. But you might have a use case to expose cases and articles to your customers through Community Cloud, or expose accounts and contacts to your partners, to a partner community. However, when you do that, you need to be mindful about how to expose these in a secure manner. One control that we are going to see today for exposing these objects in a very secure manner are org-wide sharing rules. So if you are a community or Salesforce admin, then you definitely know about different types of access control mechanisms that we have in our product, right? There is CRUD, there is FLS, and there is sharing. Now, you can configure the CRUD at the profile levels in different ways. However, org-wide sharing is one very effective way to expose your objects through your communities. Now, org-wide sharing rules are under the setup menu, which I'm going to show you in a demo in a minute. And for today's session, we are going to only focus on the default external access column for these org-wide sharing rules. And default external users are, in this case, community users. And the possible values for each object for these sharing rules can be private, public read-write, and public read or controlled by the parent. And the name suggests, for example, public read-write means these are readily available for public to read and write, and that is, in some cases, the default values for your internal objects. So default values are not always private, but it is highly recommended that the admins should set these values to private, so that only the owners of those objects will be able to view those objects and or change those objects, and not anybody else. And as I mentioned, this is the most effective way to restrict access to your internal objects through communities. I mean, you can restrict access through CRUD and FLS as well. However, in case those permissions are not correctly configured, this is the most effective way to restrict access to your internal objects. So let's see that in the demo. And before that, this is the screen where sharing rules are defined for org-wide sharing, and as I mentioned, that particular column, default external access, some of the default values are public read-write. For example, account object here on the row 2 is public read-write by default. So if there is no business requirement for your communities, this should be set to private. And I'm going to show you how the exposure happens for different values. So this is my internal org. If you go to setup and search for sharing, in the sharing settings, as I mentioned, some of the values are public read-write by default. For example, account right now is public read-write. And this is the community which is associated to that particular org, which I just showed. And I have logged in as an external community user here. I'm not an admin. And there are certain endpoints. For example, in order to see the accounts, this is the particular endpoint. And if I select all accounts here, then by default, your internal accounts will be exposed if the admin is not aware of default sharing model. So what the admins need to be, what the admin needs to configure is to change these values to private. So this is, we have just seen that all the accounts can get exposed if the admin is not mindful about these sharing permissions. So it is important to set these values to private. For example, here I have set that value to private. I'm not going to show this in the demo because once you change the sharing settings, those rules are applied to all the objects, and it takes some time to recalculate those sharing settings. So I have done that previously on the same org, and once you set it to private, then all the accounts which were exposed here to external users in the previous screen are not exposed anymore. How many of us here know the health check tool that is available in the org? So it is pretty important tool from the security perspective and other settings as well. So health check tool basically gives you an idea about how your security configuration is configured for the org. So this doesn't exist in the community, it exists in the org. And one of the update that we are going to push in winter 19, which is a current release which is being pushed in the production, you will get it either this month or next month, is that we are going to notify the admins with a critical warning saying that your sharing settings for some of the objects are exposed to the external users. So even if you miss it in the first place, this tool will notify you that you might want to change those settings in order to prevent the exposure. All right, and this is the note specifically for the developers. So if you are building any custom components and writing Apex classes, which are exposing the internal Salesforce objects, then you need to be mindful that the CRUD, FLS, and sharing rules are not applied by default on the Apex classes. Apex classes run in the system mode, so the developers explicitly need to code the CRUD, FLS, and sharing rules in their code. In order to see how to do it for CRUD and FLS, there is one very good resource. You can just search for Salesforce CRUD and FLS for developers on Google, and the developers will get to know how to apply those rules. For sharing, it is very easy. You need to just use the directive as shown here with sharing. in your Apex class, and then the sharing rules will be applied for your custom code or custom components that you build on your org. All right, so that was with sharing CRM data using a community. Now we are going to look at restricting file uploads in your communities. So as you know, Community Cloud has an ability for your external users to upload files on your communities. And there is a way for you to configure the file types and file sizes that a community admin wants to allow their users on a particular community. So that particular setting is under Community Workspace, Administration and Preferences, and I'm going to show you again in a demo. This particular configuration takes precedence over what your org values are. So whatever your org values are, if whatever values are specified under these preferences will take a preference for that particular community. So you can have different values for org, but you can have more restricted values for your communities if that's what you want. So the default values are 2 gigabytes of file size, and all file types are allowed. However, we suggest that based on the business requirements, the community admin should configure the values for the file size and file type. Now, on our server side, we have taken the precaution that even if the malicious files are uploaded by the community users, we take precautions before editing those files or before running any file operations on those files. But in terms of size, the community admin needs to be mindful because 2 gigabytes default size is huge, and that might choke up the resources of your community. So be mindful about these things and reduce the default file size allowed, and also the type if you know what kind of file types you want to allow on your community. For example, file types like JSP, PHP5, or SHTML, which can have code, shouldn't be allowed to be uploaded on your community because there is under normal circumstances, there is no reason for community users to upload these kinds of code files on the community. In order to get more information about it, we recommend that you go through the OWASP page called OWASP Unrestricted File Upload Vulnerabilities and what can go wrong with unrestricted file uploads. All right, so let's look this into the demo. So this is my org, and as you know, we can see all the communities which are associated with your org in this all communities area. And pardon me, there are a lot of communities here, but I'm going to select the second one for the demo purposes. And under Community Administration, Preferences, here you can define maximum file size that I'm going to define 5 megabytes and whatever file types that are allowed. And if there is a business case that only some images and text files should be allowed, then you can enter those here and click Save, and only those files will be allowed in the community. All right, with this, let's head to the next topic. Kevin, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Yeah, so the next security topic is clickjacking. And so what is clickjacking is best explained with an example. Normally you have your own community and users visit your site in their browser. You can also have another website that they're visiting put your community in an iframe. And there's lots of valid use cases for this. Can you move the mouse real quick, please?
Okay.
The mouse pointer.
Yeah.
It gets in the way.
Oh, sorry.
Technical difficulties.
Magic corner.
Yeah. So there's lots of valid use cases for this, but not every website out there is friendly, and they can just put your community in an iframe if they feel like it, and that's when clickjacking becomes possible. And essentially, they load your community in an invisible iframe with style rules and try and convince you to click on something that you think is their website, like a free cruise button, but it's really the click gets registered on the community itself, so they've essentially hijacked your click. And if you're logged in at the time, they can fool you into clicking around and doing actions that you wouldn't normally do. And so it can be very damaging. So by default, how to defend against this, for an out-of-the-box community, you don't have to do anything. We set a server-side property called xframe options that when a browser tries to load the iframe, it sees this header and determines whether to actually block the frame from loading or not. And so we set that to same origin by default. So only a community page can put another page on that community within an iframe. Any other website will not work. We are a very flexible platform, though, so you can override the setting if you need to. Currently, that setting exists in the legacy site.com UI. It will be migrated in the future. If you haven't been there before, the normal way to get there is through the community management, and then administration, pages, and there's the link to site.com studio there at the bottom. A quicker way to get there, I think, is with the Lightning Community Builder. You just copy-paste everything up to the first / and go to that URL, and it will redirect you to the studio. But let's examine those options there. So the default option is the middle one, which is same origin only. You can also restrict that even further so that community pages can't even load other community pages, which is no iframing. And then on the opposite side, you can allow any website to frame your community. That's currently been the only thing you can do to let your community be framed by another website. In the future, we're also going to allow a middle ground where you can actually specify certain domains that are trusted and you want to let them frame. And that's a good segue into the next topic, which is content security policy and trusted sources. So CSP, or content security policy, it's another header we send on our side, and it's a set of directives that tell the browser what resources are okay to load on the community. And the security impact that this feature provides is it mitigates a lot of cross-site scripting attacks where someone tries to inject JavaScript into your community that you didn't put there, and other injection attacks as well. So more advanced communities that involve some coding, they might have some use cases of needing to call out to a foreign translation service, for instance, or analytics is another. And with content security policy, it lets you have more flexible control over what's allowed and what's not. Previously, prior to Winter 19, it was kind of an all or nothing approach where we had a critical update we encouraged people to opt into that would essentially forbid all of these things. But the default was you could do whatever you want. We've gotten rid of that, so with Winter 19, we're introducing 2 new per community settings. We've nicknamed them CSP Full and CSP Lite. We'll go into differences here in a bit. But they both provide a much more secure foundation. So under the hood, there's these directives for CSP. We're not going to go through all of them, but that's what you'll see if you inspect the HTTP request. It's best to think of them as 3 classes of resources that you have control over. And so you have the JavaScript resources, and you can actually define your own whitelisted extensions to these, as well as being allowed to use inline JavaScript in your community head markup. And then the middle option there is for everything that's not JavaScript, images, fonts, API requests, if you have a CMS system, for instance, and so on. And those you define at an org level, and they apply to all of your communities. And then finally, there's the foreign framing aspect of it. CSP has an equivalent to the header we just discussed for clickjacking, but it's a little more flexible, so it acts in pretty much the same way. So some common scenarios. So CSP Full now is the default we want people to choose. It has a very restricted JavaScript setting. Only JavaScript on the same domain as the community can execute. Inline JavaScript cannot execute. So if you have something custom in your head markup, it won't work. But if you want to load an image from some foreign domain or a CMS system or whatever, you can add trusted sites, and that will be supported. CSP Lite is the more flexible option for those use cases that do need that foreign JavaScript, like in an analytics service. And then, of course, our legacy mode or grandfathered mode is what we had previously, summer 18, which was by default, pretty much everything's allowed. At the end of the day, it is a website. It's your website, and you can customize it how you need, but we're trying to provide you tools to not hurt yourself. So some basic scenarios there at the bottom. Generally, you want to stay in CSP Full mode, but there are circumstances you'll need to change. So where you do this, there's a new section in Lightning Community Builder called, in the settings panel called Security. And the default option is the third one, which is the grandfathered one. It allows everything. The 2 new options, CSP Full is the recommended one where you're restricting access to everything that's not JavaScript, or you're restricting JavaScript, and you can extend it to allow non-JavaScript objects. And then the middle options are CSP Lite, which lets you define JavaScript. So the default options, again, if you're a developer and curious, essentially changes it from everything, including inline, to not inline, and yeah, these slides will be available afterwards if you want to get into the details. Where you actually go to extend these things, for this non-JavaScript resources, there's a section in the org settings called CSP Trusted Sites. It was there previously, but it was only for LEX, just Lightning pages. We've extended that so you can control the context of a communities or both LEX and communities. And that's where you define a domain that says this domain is allowed to have resources load in my communities that have opted into the new options. And this applies for everything that's not JavaScript, essentially. And republishing is not needed because it's an org-wide setting. Scripts, on the other hand, they're community by community basis. You want to be very careful with what scripts you allow in. So when you change to the middle option, the CSP Lite, it opens up the head markup for inline scripts, and also exposes a new section of the builder where you can add trusted sites that are for that community and for JavaScript resources. We don't recommend it as a default option. You should stay in the recommended CSP full, but if you need that extra JavaScript from external sources, then this is how you'd do it. So it's kind of a lot to take in. In the interest of time, we're not doing a full live demo, but quickly we'll go through kind of an end-to-end flow. If you're doing this the first time and I want to add Google Tag Manager to my community, this is the recommended path. And so you start by adding the trusted site for Google Tag Manager, and if you don't know that already, usually searching Google Tag Manager CSP will bring up the things you need. So this is one of them, Google tagmanager.google.com. You go to your org settings, and that's where you add that, and if it's needed anyway. And then after that, you go to your community that you want to put it in, change its mode to the middle option, the CSP Lite, and that lets you add a JavaScript resource. So when you click the add site here, then this comes up, and you can add the domain for JavaScript. After that, then you add your head markup, which is in the advanced section of the builder if you haven't seen that before. And then you can put your script there that Google pastes for you. And then after that, you're essentially in test and validate mode. You can publish it. The security level setting is in the community builder, so it won't actually take effect on your live community until you hit publish. But of course, things will be out of order. And if you have a community already, it's already out of order. So if we try and change to the newer options, and you have these foreign objects already, if you're using a Chrome-based browser and you're in the builder, when it gets blocked, you will receive a pop-up that tells you about it. Other browsers don't have this integrated, so you do have to look at the developer console. And of course, the runtime for a published community, this is the only place to look at currently. Improving the ease of use of this is one of our priorities for coming releases. But these errors are essentially things you have to deal with and make sure it's actually a domain that you were expecting. You take that domain and go apply it to either the JavaScript trusted site or the non-JavaScript, or both in some cases. So just a kind of heads up, like right now, nothing is changing for default communities, existing communities, because we can't break anyone. But going forward, we do want to make these better security options the default, and at some point we'll be asking customers to migrate. So with that, I'll pass it back to Swapnil to finish up the last topic.
Cool. So we are towards the end of the presentation, and the last topic that we are going to discuss today is the spam protection. Spam is anything which is an unwanted content that is generated by the malicious users on your community, and their motive could be either sell something or to advertise something on your communities. There are proactive ways by which you can prevent these spammers from spamming your communities, and one of the ways to do this is by using the moderation rules. And the role of a community moderator is basically to validate that whatever content is posted on the community is a quality content. The same moderation rules can also be used to prevent the spam on your communities. I'm going to show you a quick demo how to configure these moderation rules. So again, these are my different communities. I'm going to select one of those. I click on the workspaces. Under workspaces, you can see the moderation tile. Click on that. And then there are 3 different tabs on top. And when you click on the rules tab and click on the new moderation rule, you can create either a content rule or a rate rule. For the purpose of this demo, we are going to use the rate rule in order to prevent the spam. And I have already configured the rule, so I'm not going to create it from the beginning, but we are just going to edit the already existing rule here. The name of the rule is spam protection rule. There is a description, and now I'm going to apply this rule to posts and private messages that are created on the community. And I'm going to also apply a member criteria called new members. So this particular rule will be only applied to the new members that are on the community. And in order to define new members, you can create a different member criteria here to tell the system, what does a new member mean. So for example, whoever has been registered to community in last 10 days can be a new member. So I'm going to select that member criteria for this rule, and I'm going to select a time frame of 3 minutes. And if there are 6 posts or private messages within the 3 minutes time frame by a new member, then the moderator will be notified. That's what I'm configuring here with the notify moderators text box. And if there are 10 posts within a time frame of 3 minutes, then that is a probable indication that a new member is trying to spam your community. So in that case, the members will be frozen. And the moderator can go to the moderate tab after they get an alert from the system saying that there is something going wrong. And over here, they can moderate the community in terms of who the new member is, what they're posting, should we unfreeze them, or what should be done with their posts, should we delete them, and things like that. So those are moderation rules, but you can also apply those to prevent spam. So for example, this is the same rule that we have just configured. And in order to see more tips and tricks about these rules, how you can configure them, I'm going to share you a resource, a YouTube video, which was presented, I think, 2 Dreamforces ago. And also in the community setup guide, there are different examples on how you can set these moderation rules in order to prevent proactively the probable spammers that are going to spam your communities. And this applies to public communities, because that's where the spammers can come and attack the community, because anybody over the internet can register and start using the public community. So for example, if there are 4 posts and 2 private messages which adds up to 6, then the moderator will be notified. If there are 8 posts and 2 private messages which is greater than 6 in total, then both the moderator will be notified and the member will be frozen immediately. So our rule that we just configured is going to control the content that is generated by spammers or other users in this fashion as shown on this slide. All right, with that, we have completed the 6 topics, and let's look at the further resources that you can use to further educate ourselves. The first one is a trail that exists on the trailhead, which talks about sharing the CRM data with external communities in a secure way. And over there, you can actually play with the playground org and how to share these objects securely with your communities. Salesforce community setup guide, if you are related with or associated with Salesforce communities, you would know about this resource. There are different community trails on Trailhead as well. Please check them out. We talked about unrestricted file upload, vulnerabilities, and the risks related to that. There is good resource on that. I talked about community moderation and spam protection. There is a YouTube video you can check out for different tips and tricks for the spam protection. And also community setup guide has different guidelines on how you should write your moderation rules. Now Salesforce has an access control model which has different techniques under it, like CRUD FLS and sharing. For a new admin, that could be a little confusing, but this particular video series on who sees what in Salesforce org and communities, which talks about all these different access control mechanisms in a 3 minutes videos. There are multiple videos. It explains very well how you can configure these controls, and we highly recommend that you please check out those videos. And then Kevin talked about clickjacking. There is a nice resource on clickjacking. And there is a new book that is published in June of 2018.
Right, a very recent book. It's also available in the Dream Store outside. But it's just very chock full of good information, a nice thick section on the object sharing model, which is probably the most confusing aspect of it all. But it's very recent as well, so it's up to date. I recommend it.
All right, and if you are interested in security sessions, so we are here currently, and there are other security sessions that are going to take place in this Dreamforce. So if you want to take a picture of this slide, so to attend the other sessions, which we again highly recommend if you are responsible for security of your org or communities. And there is going to be a developer keynote tomorrow, which you should definitely attend. At least for the developers, this is like a must-go session. We are going to take questions now. If you have any additional questions or if you want to discuss some things in detail about Community Cloud, not just the security aspects, but anything related to Community Cloud, then there is a booth in Campground. I think Campground is in Moscone South. And downstairs on the first floor also, there is a booth for Community Cloud where you can go and talk with the experts, the developers who actually work on Community Cloud, like Kevin. You can go there and talk and discuss any questions that you have at length with them. With that, this is the summary. We started with discussing how you can securely share your internal objects to external community and external community users. Then we saw how you can restrict the file type and file upload in terms of size and type for your files that are allowed to be uploaded. We talked about clickjacking protection, what it is, and how to protect that. The default values are secure, but if you need to change those values, what you need to do. Then we talked about content security policy. The new communities, the existing communities are not going to be affected right away through this, but this is the industry norm for security standards, and content security policy is something we are providing out of the box for your communities going forward in future releases. So we need to start educating ourselves about these security measures. And at last, we looked at spam protection, how you can proactively protect spammers from spamming your community. Yeah. With that, we are done, and thank you for attending. Thank you for the interest. I hope it was worth your time, and we would like to take questions if there are any. If somebody has a question.
I'd also remind everyone to fill out your surveys in case you want to see another topic covered more in depth later, or a topic we didn't cover at all. That's the best way to tell us that. But.
Cool. If you can ask the question on the microphone so that the recording will also be done for the question.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation here. Salesforce sells Shield with Community. When should you use Shield, and what type of fields do you encrypt with Shield in a community setup?
Cool, that's a good question. If your community is public and all the content that is generated is public, then probably you don't need encryption. But based on your business cases, you can encrypt, and that option is available. The Shield option is available. Do you have any ideas on?
That's a good summary, I think.
Yeah. So for public communities, we haven't seen a lot of examples where customers want to encrypt the content that is generated on the community because it is public anyway. But if you are dealing with partner communities where some of the content that partner generate, you want to secure that, then you can definitely use Shield. And I would encourage to talk with Shield people who are downstairs on how to do that if you are interested. Yeah, yeah, please.
I'm wondering because I received an alert recently, and I was wondering if this new functionality that you're addressing may solve it, which is regarding to tab nabbing inside of the community, so tricking customers to go somewhere else and try to gain their credentials. Mm-hmm. Is that something that may be addressed with the new CSP functionality that you're referring here?
Right. Did you say tab napping? Or?
Tab nabbing.
Sounds like a variation of clickjacking, if I have that right. But generally, yeah, if someone's trying to socially engineer you to click on things you wouldn't normally click on, then they have control of your community, and CSP as well as the clickjacking settings prevent that. So,
Okay, I can
yeah,
show
we
you.
can. We'll be around afterwards as well.
Sounds
if you
great.
want to show
Thank
us.
you.
So. All right. Anything else? Oh.
Hey, there's a lot of pages that come out of the box with communities, both in Lightning and the old Visual Force communities. Is there like a resource we can say, hey, here's all the pages you get, so we can just make sure what they're doing and people can't go to them and do things we don't want them to do?
Yeah, we do have some UI coming up to actually show details of all of the pages. Currently, though, like the best way to actually get a view of all your pages is through trying to say export the community. That shows a list of all the pages when it packages it up. But yeah, it's definitely a gap, like because there is a security concern where by default you have a public community setting, but even if your community is by default private, individual pages can be public, and there's currently not a good way to see all that in one place. But
Does the export also include like the core/UI pages?
the core UI pages.
Yeah, it's like just the old Visual Force out-of-the-box pages, like Chatter or...
Yeah, like all the pages that have a default page variation, they get packaged up with the package.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, are there any plans for like two-factor authentication when people log into the community every single time or something?
I think there are, but we just base ourselves off of the platform login for the most part. So the login app experts downstairs would probably know more about that.
Okay.
Yeah, for user authentication, you also have the SSO integration option available in community. So if your if your company has an
Yeah.
SSO, that is one of the options.
Okay.
Or you can piggyback on the org's login, which has two-factor.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Any other questions? Cool. With that, we are almost towards the end of the time. So thank you again, everybody, for attending the session.
Definitely, thanks.